Bonjour, everyone. My name is Anthony Staley. I'm a citizen of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin, and a descendant of the Red Lake and White Earth Nations of Minnesota, which are Ojibwe nations. And I and talk with you a little bit about the work that I do back in Minneapolis. By training, I'm a clinical psychologist, doctor of psychology, and I run a community health center in Minneapolis, which serves the largest and most densest urban population of Native Americans living in the United States. And in that role, I do a lot of things, but I think the thing I'm most proud of is the work I've done over the last 6 years or so, or 7 years ago, integrating cultural and traditional healing practices into a Western model of care. And I really was inspired to do that based on sort of my own experiences of over the last maybe 20 years of my life. I'm a recovering alcoholic and drug addict from the earlier part of my life. So I stopped drinking and using drugs when I was 23, and I'll be 63 in October, and I'll have 40 years of recovery. I stopped shortly after my 23rd birthday. But one of the things that was most, I think, helpful for me was I used Western practices to sort of get off of alcohol and drugs. I went to like treatment, and I did like the thing, the Alcoholics Anonymous, and the real structured sort of like thing that a lot of people in our country and all over the world do to sort of do that. But what was transformative for me was when I came back home to Minnesota. I was living on the West Coast. I came back home to Minnesota. And I did that actually the year that my sister Ramona and my brother Charlie had their firstborn child, which is Jillian, who you know. For a long time, I didn't go back to Minnesota because it was a place of a lot of hurt for me, and my mother died when I was very young there, so I didn't go back. And when they had a child, I went back for a visit and reconnected with my homeland. And then about almost 18 years ago, I adopted Dakota boys from my partner's first cousin. And I don't remember why, but I always wanted to be a father. As my earliest memory of being a child was that I wanted to take care of other human beings. My mom was a single mother, but I was late in the age of my family. I was like the fifth born, and my responsibility in that role was to take care of my younger siblings because she was also off doing things in the community by that point in my life. So one of the things that was really challenging for me was I wanted to have children, but I had no real plan for how to make that happen. And what I mean by that is that I'm also a gay man, which is a homosexual man. But in our community, we call those people two-spirit people. Two-spirited people are known to kind of hold both the spirit and the knowledge and the practices of both men and women, the male and the female, kind of like what some people call power, but I call it spirit. And so in a colonized society, there's no real pathway for that to happen at all, right? So my partner and I, actually, sometimes when I really have a problem with my children, I blame her for the responsibility for me having them. We were in Washington on this place in North, at the very tip top of Washington, in this beautiful, it was a reservation, but it was like the rainforest called Nia Bay. It's like one of the most beautiful places I've ever been on the planet. I think your land is quite frankly, a real contender because it was just stunning. It took my breath away. We had a ceremony on the beach that day, and we just did a ceremony where we prayed. My prayer was simple. I asked for a family. And it wasn't really very specific. I was just like, I want a family. So you did a prayer, and in the middle of that prayer, there was this big cloud and storm cloud coming towards us. It was right on the west coast. So these big, huge storms come in. And I was anxious, and I thought we should go in, but Ramona and my partner and his aunt, who was with us, was like, let's just keep singing and dancing. We're in the middle of ceremony. Creator will take care of us. And, this was a real pivotal point in my life because it changed the direction of my whole way of thinking. It changed the whole way that I think about showing up in the work that I do in my community and also in my clinic and the work that I do, even in my own family. And we did this ceremony, and I had, at that point in my life, I'd given up the idea of ever having children. I was 44 years old, and I was like, well, that's not going to happen, so I might as well just give it up. And I had the ceremony, and we were singing, we're dancing. In the middle of this ceremony, 2 eagles were soaring over us the entire time we were singing, dancing, and praying. And then as this storm got closer to us, it broke open and it kind of went around us. And I was like kind of amazed, right? And then one of the things that was really important that happened shortly after, 2 weeks, literally about 2 to 2.5 weeks after that ceremony we had on the beach, we got a phone call. My partner, I got a phone call from his aunt, the cousin's mother, asking if we would adopt her twin boys who were going to be born shortly thereafter in May. And so it was like a dream come true, and it's like an answered prayer, right? So I put out the words and I asked for the thing, and we did what we have always done since the beginning of time. We asked, Creator and creation and the earth to do something for us. And so ever since then, my life pivoted and changed, and it actually brought me back home to Minnesota. My sons are Dakota, so I was like, we have to raise our children on the land. Like, we have to bring them back home. They need to be on the land. They need to hear the songs of their people. They need to be on the territory. They need to be around other Dakota people. They need to practice their ceremonies. They need to practice their language, and they need these things. And at that point in my life, I pretty much just kind of gave up the idea of ever being a legitimate quote-unquote Ojibwe. I kind of practice more Dakota practices now than I have for the last 20 years or so. And one of the things that, as a result of that, I think that experience of just understanding like the importance of like raising children and how important they are to who we are as indigenous people all over the planet. Like, I was moved today while you were talking about the power of women and why women are so important, and like that intention that colonization has made to sort of like, make women invisible, make their power invisible, make their and indigenous people, we know that intuitively that women are powerful. They're the only thing on the planet outside of the Creator who can create life, right? Like to this day, I don't think I know any men who can create life. They can do a lot of things, but they can't create life. And that is like the most amazing experience to know. Like, and for me, I think there was always this point in my head where I was like, I'm never going to achieve this because I don't have that, right? And so I kind of like, it was really hard. So fast forward to like the work I do now is, I've been really privileged to work in a community and a clinic that sort of like allows me to, and trusts me to sort of like bring this traditional knowledge and the knowledge of our medicines and our practices into a Western model. And we started that work by one day we were just having a really difficult time with some of the things that were going on in our community. We had high rates of homelessness. We had this big, huge homeless encampment, like was 4 blocks down the road, with people really struggling. And I called a woman that I know that knows the practices, and I asked her, I said, would you come to our clinic and just, whatever it is that you do, will you just do something to bless our clinic and help us, because we're really very struggling here very much. And she came in and she brought 4 young women with her, and she said, can I bring some women I'm mentoring? And I said, sure. And this is what you know. I don't know this stuff. You know this, and so you get the runway. You can do whatever you want. So she brought 4 young women with her that she had been mentoring since they were 12, and they were, I think, 16 or 17 at the time. Very young girls. But they came and they did a ceremony in our clinic, and they walked around our hallway. We kind of have a circular pattern in our clinic, and they sang songs, and they burned sage and cedar, and they blessed the space. They put up cedar boughs above all the entries, which is a practice we do as a form of protection. If you go into indigenous people, you'll see something like that hanging in their homes. You probably have something similar that you do. Yeah. And so she did this thing, and when we got back to the front of the lobby of the clinic, there was a homeless man that had been a client of the clinic for a really long time. He walked in the clinic, and he walked up to my relative Donna. She was holding a big bowl of sage, and he said, can I have some medicine? And she kind of held it out, and he smudged himself, and she said, and he picked his face up when he was done smudging. He was crying. He said, I haven't had medicine in 8 years. And there was a moment in that conversation where I was like, he didn't say like he hasn't seen a doctor or a dentist. He didn't say like he hasn't gotten a vaccine, or like he said, he described what he needed, medicine, and he was crying, and he started walking away. He goes, thank you. And he said, miigwech, which is the thank you in the language of my people. And he started walking away, and I said to the young woman, I said, don't let him leave, bring him some medicines, So like they wrapped up some medicines, they brought him to him. And at that moment, it was like, I realized like, there were 2 big things that happened in that moment. One is I recognized like the power of like the prayers that I had laid down for my children. I recognized the power of what just happened in front of me, which is somebody in our community who was hurting, who was really in a really harm, like his heart was on the ground, right? He's homeless, living in an encampment. And like he was so grateful that all we did was offer him medicine. And he was so happy that he just turned and said, I got what I needed, and left. And when he did that, I was like, this is what we need. We don't need Western medicine. You can get that anywhere. You can practically go to any place and get like, Western medicine, but you can't get this anywhere else. And this is what we need. And so I said to the woman and the girls, do you think we can build a medicine garden? Because I think our relatives need medicine. And we live in a big city where medicine isn't prevalent, and that's what they need. And they said, sure. And they go, how will we do it? I said, I don't know. Let's find people who know. So then we just started this process, and we got 4 years later, we started, we built this big, huge program, and it's almost all women, right? And so one of the things that, I think we only had 1 man, and he recently left, or he might have gotten fired. I don't remember. But I think he was a little bit of a lazy man. But don't feel shamed, man. Women just work harder, I think. They just work harder. That's my theory. I was raised by women, too. I was raised all by women.
You can tell.
Can you? Okay, yeah. So women, I was raised by my single mother and a bunch of aunties and grandmas. And so what was interesting was all I did, and I'm being completely honest here, like I didn't really do a whole lot. I just created the pathway for it to happen. And so I just invited anybody would just kind of come and say like, I knew a thing. And so I'd say like, oh, that sounds like something our community would really benefit from. Can you do this here? And they'd just do it. But it led me to this work that we're doing now around birthing justice and the restoring of traditional American Indian birthing practices in Minnesota and in my community. And it just is something that kind of landed in my doorstep one day. Somebody called me up and said, hey, we want to do this. We want to create a birthing justice collaborative, and we're looking for, it was 3 Black community organizations, and they invited me in because I own this clinic, or run this clinic. I don't own it. And I said, sure. I said, well, I'm not a woman. I don't know a lot about birthing. And, I said, so I'll do it to support the work you're doing, but you have to invite in these other organizations that are women-run organizations that work with women. So I just said, like, I can't do it unless you invite, Minnesota Indian Women's Resource and these other people, because I knew my role and I knew my lane, right? So I was like, I'm not going to step in and do women's work. That's their specific gift, right? My work is to support that and to make it and give them a pathway to make it happen. And the most beautiful thing that came out of that was 2 things. One is that we built this big, huge community network of women who know traditional practices that would just, when we had these community listening sessions, we just said, we're going to talk about this thing. And then women from all over the community, even from far away, like way up north, and some women in Canada, they would come down for the listening sessions and they would share their knowledge. They would talk about their birthing experiences. They would talk about the things that healed them and helped them when they were struggling with their birthing practices, or the birth of their own children, or maybe a birth of a relative. And so they just came and they shared this with each other. And one of the most powerful things that was such a beautiful thing to do, was for me to witness, was like the relationships that built between the women. And like, there was like an instant sisterhood. They had each other's backs. They took care of each other. They protected each other. And I think the best gift that I got out of that experience was just to witness, like, I have this phrase that like, if you want something done, ask women to do it because they get shit done. So, am I not? Sorry, bleep that out. And one of the things that was the most beautiful thing of it, and I didn't even know when I was invited to do this work that where it would lead us to. And we did this for about 2 years. We had listening sessions in the community. We asked women to come and talk about their experiences, what would be most healing for them, and what would create a safe place for them to care for their babies while they were in gestation, and also once they were born. What did you need? We just asked them to come and talk about those things, and they shared all of that information. And we took that information back to our legislators, and we were like, we need a safe place where we can practice our cultural ways. Like, this is our territory, this is our land, these are our practices. We have the highest rates of maternal death in our communities. You have to let us do this work. And we were able to get almost a $400,000 investment to plan for a birthing center in Minneapolis, the first American Indian birthing center that will open in the United States ever, which I didn't know at the time I was asked to do that. So I was like, but I think the thing for me that is like the most powerful about this whole experience, and again, like I take no credit for it. I really just was asked to do a thing, and I brought some people I knew that know how to do it together and create and support them and create the pathway. Is just the spending time in that space and listening to the women talk about their own experiences of around birthing, and was just like the most hurtful, but also at the same time really healing experience. My son's birth mother died 6 months after they were born, and I had, like, I think, closed myself off to the feelings that I had about that specific thing. I think I just got busy with life and raising kids, and I didn't really let myself sort of like sit there for a while. And in these listening sessions, I would listen to women talk about like how painful their experiences were giving birth in a lot of the settings that they had. And I had this aha moment in one of them where I was like, oh my God, my children's birth mother probably had some of these same experiences. She probably suffered with postpartum depression, and she gave to me and my partner these children that she had grown inside her body for 9 months, and how hard that must have been for her to have someone else raise them. I mean, she definitely made a good. We had a long conversation about it. And she talked about like, this is the best decision. There was a moment where I was like, it's okay if you don't want to give them, let us adopt them. I want them to stay with you we had hard conversations, her and I. And then she was like, no, I know you'll do a better job of raising them. You'll give them a better life than I can give them. And I thought, in listening to these conversations, that how tremendously hard that had to be for her. And then I had this moment where I was like, this is easily the most amazing gift I've ever been given, is the sacrifice she had to make to allow me to have that. And so it's been the most beautiful experience. Has been like, I've kind of dedicated my life to continuing to support this work. And when Una was talking earlier today at the cemetery, I was like, first of all, I was like anxious because I thought I was supposed to talk right after, and I was like, Era's address to plant a tree, which I didn't even actually plant. Somebody else planted anyway. but she was talking, and I was like, oh my God, this woman has so much knowledge, right? And then I had this moment where she was talking, and I was like, every family, every community, every nation, the world would be a better place if we just, if colonization and patriarchy wasn't a thing, and if we could just give women, their space. If we could just give women their space, they're so much more powerful about creation than we are as men. And we have a role. It's not to say we don't have a role. We have a role. Our role is to be protectors and to help make that path easier. At least I'm really clear that that's my role. My role in the work I do is to let others who have the knowledge, and women definitely have all the knowledge about medicines. And where I come from, almost all of the traditional healers, the people who have the knowledge about medicines, are almost all women. I have a hard time even thinking of a man that knows that information in my community, maybe one or two. So that's all I have to say.
Okay, so, well, my name is Úna Walsh, and where you would hang the cedar in your tradition, we would have hung the cailleach, and the cailleach was the last piece of the harvest, and the spirit of the harvest. If the spirit went in front of the mower as you were mowing, and she was contained within the last sheaf. And then when you came to the last sheaf, that sheaf was cut and it was twisted and it was brought into the house, and it stayed in the house, and that ensured a safe harvest for the next year. And harvest, if it was good, not only was good, but it was the saviour of the families for the next year. So that's the same tradition, worlds apart. And I think this is the thing, it's all the same story. It's all the same story as to how people fit in together and how they live. We started in 1980 what was called the Women's Health Initiative. And the Women's Health Initiative began with a group of women who were looking at what there was in our community, which was a poor community for us growing up. And that was the fact that for most of us, we had our mothers at home. Our mothers through their own decisions in some cases, or through the very fact that there was no work for them. But those women were a constant part of your life. You went home and she was always there. And we recognised that things had changed, and that for the next generation of families, that wise woman or that elder woman was not on tap. She had to be somewhere else. She had been, in some ways, made a decision to be there, but in many ways, and I look at my daughters, I look at my granddaughters, who my granddaughter has started to train to be a midwife. I look at them and I am sad for the life that they are going to have, because all of the decisions are not decisions that they can make themselves. They are decisions that are financial constraints of the life that they are going to have to live. So they do not have the luxury any longer, whether they want to or not, to be with their children in a lot of cases, because society has said they need a mortgage and they need all of the things that mean the decision making has been taken out of their hands. And there is one thing that happened for me that really was almost like somebody opening your eyes to something that you should have known anyway. In my house at home, there were 6 of us in our family. I knew that I have a brother who's 3.5 years older than me, and I knew that there was a baby had died between him and me. And on the very seldom, and it was seldom occasions, that my mommy talked about that, because those women closed doors on their trauma and they moved on. And the women that I grew up with, like you and your mother and your aunts, the women that I grew up with ran our community. They were the people who were in the houses when a birth was happening. They were there on any occasion they were needed. They were there. They were the people who laid out the dead. So they were on the cycle of life from it began till it ended. And I'm not trying to make this sound like wonderful stuff. This was hard times, but the woman was the cog that turned all those wheels in a community when we were growing up. And that was losing. But so I knew this baby had died. I knew the constraints of the Catholic Church said that an unbaptized baby would not go in their consecrated ground. And I still knew that my mother, when she didn't talk about it, I knew that baby was in the graveyard in Glasdrummond with my grandparents. And I suppose looking back, although you can't rationalise things at a young age, we didn't ask her because we sensed her hurt. So we didn't ask questions of her. And I had gone to an aunt, the last of my daddy's family. All my mummy's family had died. But I had gone to an aunt one evening just purely to ask something about history. And we had sat down and we talked about things. And I said to her, you know, Lizzie, Mommy never talked about that baby. And she said, I was 62 years of age. And she said to me, I'll tell you about your baby. Because she and her younger brother, my daddy's brother and sister, had not married. They were still living at home at that time with my granny and granda. And she said, your daddy came over the road on the bicycle with the baby in a white box that he'd made himself. And Mommy was at home. And we met him at the end of the Kiernally Road. And we brought her, the 3 of us took the baby to Glasdrummond and we buried it in the family grave at Glasdrummond. And I said to her, but Mommy referred to that baby as stillborn. So how was it allowed at that time, which would have been in the 1950s, early 1950s, how was it allowed to go into consecrated ground? She had been a nurse in her lifetime. And she said to me, Una, the only person in most of the houses when a baby was being born was a neighbouring woman. And if questions were asked, her answer was, the baby drew breath and I put water on it. And that allowed the baby to be buried in consecrated ground where the parents knew where their baby was. because in some cases, those babies were buried at the side of ditches. Now, they were buried where a fairy thorn. There are definitely stories, and this is the value of the oral tradition. This is what we threw away with our oral tradition. There are stories of people choosing to bury those unbaptized babies where a fairy bush was, because the pithrogs, or the story tradition that went with the fairy tree, meant that it wouldn't be cut down. So your baby was safe and you knew where it was. There are many stories of graveyards right across Ireland where babies are lying outside the walls of those graveyards. In Belfast, in the big cemetery in Belfast, they were thrown into the bog meadows. And families are only now bringing back and finding out. So on her story, I thought, look at how women supported women against the church. Very quietly, without causing any fuss, without making anything public. They knew exactly what they needed to do. And I follow that on with a story. I am the mother of 7 children, 3 of whom are 2 spirits, like yourself. And I had newborn twins when the child that was next to that was 13 months. And that 13 months old baby couldn't walk. And I have never had, my only problem in all of my life, and I can remember right back to childhood, has been confinement, being closed in. I don't like the feeling of being closed in. If I can open the front door and go independently through it, my sanity is good. And if I get to a stage where I can't do that, I recognize I have a problem. So I had 2 newborns and an older child who couldn't walk. And the woman that I lived beside, and I lived beside her for over 40 years, and I was privileged to live beside her, had a disabled husband. And at some time in every day of the first 3 months of those baby twins' lives, she would arrive into me, a woman who had so much trouble in her own house. She would arrive into me and she would put the older child in a pushchair and she'd say, we'll go to the shop, Una. So she got me out of the house every day until the older child was fit to walk and I could do that on my own. She died 2 years ago. I never said to her, nor did I need to say to her, for the first 3 months of their life, you saved my sanity. Just as she didn't need to say to me, whenever she needed help in her house, I moved in and then I moved back out. And it didn't have to be public and it didn't have to be spoken about. We knew that that would happen. And I think for us in the 1980s, it was putting that back into our community, looking at the role that those older women played in supporting the entire community, not just other women. It's not intrinsically a woman's story. It's a family story. Because there is no doubt across the world, the person who regulates a house, who regulates the money in a house, is the woman. If the thing's bad, it's the woman who somehow makes that right. So it was about that. So we had, if you like, developed a group of wise women. Some of those older women who could meet with younger women who had breastfed babies themselves, who could talk to a young woman about breastfeeding. We now have, I think, influenced, and Fergal is here through as a social worker, but we have influenced statutory bodies in that we now have a midwifery-led birthing in a hospital setting, but it is midwifery-led. It is led by women. One of the things we also looked about in the 1980s was that anywhere there were going to be decisions made that were part of the daily life of a woman and her family, then if we could, we would have a South Armagh woman sitting at the table where those decisions were going to be made. And that was really important, because you can't turn the world back. You can't bring it back to the life that my mother had. You have statutory bodies, you have hospital settings. You can't completely change that. But what you can do is you can put somebody in there who, at a practical level, what we were finding when we began the story in 1980, and I explained this to a consultant in Belfast. We talked about, we have a room in South Armagh in a building, and instead of a person going to Belfast to consult with you, could you not come once a month to South Armagh and we'll gather all the people who have an appointment with you into that? And they said, no, you couldn't do that. The reality for somebody who, a woman will say, living the other side of Crossmaglen, which is on the periphery of the Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland state, in 1980 was, if it was an appointment for her husband, for her elderly parents who she may have been looking after, or for her children, she would ensure that that appointment was kept in Belfast. And if it were for herself, because of the trouble it would take to do it, she was sometimes not doing it. So, reality, if you had a hospital appointment in the Royal in Belfast, we'll say at 2 o'clock in the day, and you were living in Cullaville and you didn't have transport, there was no bus service that would take you from your home to Crossmaglen, which is the nearest place you would get a bus. So, first of all, you had to get somebody in to look after your children in the house and put them to school, because you needed to leave your house with a lift if you had no transport into Crossmaglen to get the 8 o'clock bus. The 8 o'clock bus, which would then bring you into Newry, and then you had to get a second bus from Newry that would bring you to Belfast, and then you had to get public transport again in Belfast or a taxi that would bring you over to whichever hospital you were going to in Belfast. And then you had maybe a 5-minute appointment, or at most a 10-minute appointment with a consultant who could have done that in a room in South Armagh. And you had to then reverse your journey the whole way back home. And you would be back home probably on the 5 o'clock bus into Crossmaglen that evening. So a full day. So you put it in the bin and you thought, I'll be better next week. It won't be worth the bother. Mm-hmm. So those were the things that we were trying to address. And it's only if you have somebody sitting in the room who understands that, and when the decision is going to be made, puts their hand up and said, no way, not happening. This is what this looks like. This is what your decision looks like where I live and for my family. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, the community structure that set up all of that and made it viable was partially dismantled by the government when it came back into being, because their belief was, we are here, we have the answers. So where the community, the only way community works is if somebody comes and gives absolute credence to what the community is telling them and follows that to its conclusion, which is not what is happening for us now within the government that we have. And nobody is naive enough to think that every community is going to get absolutely all at once. The problem is that government and people in statutory bodies don't trust the community to be willing to accept that they wait. If people have information about how it's going to work, then we know it's not going to work overnight. But give us the trust and the confidence that allows us to do that. We had a childcare project in South Armagh practically ready to go. It was going to be funded under the Office of Deputy first and deputy first minister in Northern Ireland. And as you all know, it's always parity of esteem. So we had decided we wouldn't go. We hadn't our structures properly in place, and we were content to not go. And they arrived back to us and said, you have to put in that application from South Armagh. And we said, but we know we're not ready. We don't want to do this until we have everything ready to go. And the answer was, there is a childcare project ready to go on the Shankill Road, and we won't fund it unless we're funding one in South Armagh. And I said, I have no wish to stop women on the Shankill Road having a childcare project. What nonsense is that? And that's how this structure is working. Mm-hmm. Or, as you can very plainly see, not working. So they're just some of the things that have happened in this South Armagh community, that wellness, that role for women, that sense of themselves and of the community is not only happening then through medical work, it's happening through the heritage work that I do. It's all part, it's happening through Antubber that the Finnegans family did. It's happening in those ways where the community are providing a solution to the needs of its own community. Now, that's all very well if you have, as my mother used to say, you can't whistle without the upper lip. You know, it's a dirty word, but you can't do it without money. Yep. In some way. But that money can't be money that ties you up and doesn't allow you to do it in the proper way for the community, which is exactly what is happening. If you give money, I'm at a lovely stage in my life. I'm 70 years of age. I don't take funding from anyone. I can stand anywhere I want and say what I want, and nobody can tell me not to because they're not giving me anything. Now, that's an absolute freedom to have. And you know, younger people are not going to have that. I recognise that. I'm in a very lucky place that I can do that. But we have to, as communities, and it's the same with Anthony's community, we have to insist that if there is money, then that money is allowed to be used in the proper way that will help the community. I think we've stepped in on Anthony's on the cure.
If you don't mind, has anybody got any questions or comments for Anthony or Una? It would be a shame not to give you the opportunity after hearing such powerful words from both our speakers. So,
I think Una, the very last, everything said brilliant. The last point you made about not listening to the community, funders could very well do it. You know, we would have had experience of applying for funding and the stipulations and the dates and the closing dates and the opening dates and the seasons even doesn't match. And the regulations, and it's just all arseways, you know, to use that word. But it's just, it doesn't help people who are trying to do anything, especially in our own case where we're doing things with our own property. It doesn't help. A lot of these funds are just, rarely you get a fund and you're allowed to do with it what you can do with it. You end up having to dance over there in order to get singing over there, you know, and they could well do it here, but again, they're all doing their own thing. There's no joined up lines.
Well, I suppose the other thing about that is that we elect people. And really we should be looking at the fact that if you elect somebody and they haven't performed in the way that you want them to perform, then why are you re-electing them? And those are some of the things, and I firmly believe that at local government administration, which is our council area, that there should be no such thing as party politics, that we should elect people on a community structure, that are going in to work about their community, because when it's on a party structure, the party comes first. So I think at that local government level, that should not be what's happening. I don't know, because these are just things. They're things I think of. There is something like I'm now working a lot of the time in heritage and culture. The Southern Tourist Board have what is called Ireland's Ancient East, which runs up the east coast of the southern part of Ireland. And I had written under something that they'd published last week. Could you please explain to me how you think Ireland's Ancient East stops at a line in the road that didn't come into being until 1921?
Right.
You know, nonsense. You know, nonsense. Common sense. Where did common sense go? You know, I think there's a wind tunnel somewhere, and they put them through it.
Emptied their brains.
Yeah.
It usually happens at universities.
You know, and everything that's in their head going in is dampened down, and they're given a new set of beliefs, and then they come out the other side.
Yeah.
But Ireland's Ancient East now stops at a road at the border. I can sit in a bus in Ballsmill, and the front of the bus is in the townland of Glasdrummond. The front of the bus is in the townland of Drumbillah. It is in the county of Louth. It is in the province of Leinster. It is in the jurisdiction of the Southern government, and it is in the European Union. And like your word, the arse of the bus is in the townland of Glasdrummond, in the county of Armagh, in the province of Ulster, in the jurisdiction of the United Kingdom, and it's not in the EU. The one bus.
I think you should be running the country.
And it's exactly back to Anna Parnell's quote: the greatest of all independence is the independence of your mind, and being willing to question and not accept what somebody else tells you is the right way to do it.
Yeah.
Anthony, would you like to have a closing remark?
No, I mean, I guess the only thing I would say is that, like, we're in America now, especially with our current administration, we're kind of in the same boat. Like, I mean, I traveled here on Wednesday of last week, but between Friday of last week and Wednesday of the week I got here, my clinic lost about close to $1 million. They cut the funding for our maternal and child health program in half. So I mean, I have to continue how to do the work and figure out some other way to make it work, because I'm not going to not do the work. And then I think just some of that is like, you know, kind of like what we're talking about. We got to this place in America because there's been intentional processes, I think, over the last 2 or 3 decades to specifically dummy down America. You know, we divested in education. We've made it very, very difficult for people to achieve achieve education successfully, especially in I guess disinvested communities like Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, or other poor communities. Poor white communities are even struggling with that, right? And so if you dummy down and you make it so that people don't understand the political process, they don't understand how elections work, or what my civic sort of responsibilities are, and how I exercise those things. You take that out of that process, you can control them. You can control them, and you can make all the decisions, and you can convince them, like the guy just did last year, that I'm going to actually make your life better, and then make wealthy people more wealthy, and you desperate, right? And if you make people desperate, you can control them.
And sometimes you wonder, is that withdrawal of funding a deliberate measure, because it absolves them of the responsibility, and that they know that the community will take up the slack themselves. Mm-hmm. So you're actually being led to that process of where it's a deliberate decision. It's not something that just happened, but it's a deliberate decision, because the community will go back. As you said, you're not going to quit the work. you're going to find another way to do the work. So
Yeah, and I mean, I think we're headed for hard times in America for sure. Even I just think about my own community. But I know this about Minneapolis, and I know this about Minnesota, where I'm from. Like almost everything that became like a big, huge national movement in the United States that are specific to American Indian people, American Indian movement started in like the women started that movement, right? Men became the figureheads later, like we like to do, and but women started that. Indian education, women started that. Indian Child Welfare Act, which made it illegal for you to remove Indian children from their mothers and their families without a legal process. Women started that. And so what I do know is that the Cheyenne have a saying that says, the hearts of a nation are not on the ground until, a nation is not defeated until the hearts of its women are on the ground. And so that speaks volumes about the power and the strength of women when they work together, when they convene, when they use common sense to solve real world problems in their local community, right? And so I think that that's probably what we're going to have to do for the next several years, because
rely on ourselves.
we rely on ourselves, like we always have, actually. So.
My mommy walked into Daisy Hill on the 4th of July 1976. My first child was born, and that was her first grandchild. And she admired this child in the basket, and then she turned round to me and she said, "You'll not have to be churched, Una." And that was her victory. The churching had stopped. She had resented it her lifetime, and she knew that her daughter wouldn't have to do it. So
Yeah. But, thank you.